there's a connection between our heart, our breath, and our brain. And
Hmm.
if these three aren't like coordinated together, then there's a disconnect. If you look at every negative emotion out there,
Yeah.
it all has one thing in common: they stop breathing. Right? We've
Mm.
all seen little kids, or if you have a son or daughter, or family member, or grandson or granddaughter, when they come running up and they're angry, and you go, just breathe, just breathe. They get angrier because they know as soon as they breathe, they're going to lose that anger. It's gonna
Right.
leave their body because so if we learn to breathe through these processes. So what BrainTap does in essence is puts us into a physiological condition that's much like a flow state.
You're listening to A New Way of Living with Dan Voss, inspiring you to a new life of breathwork, cold therapy, and plant medicine. In this week's episode, my guest is Dr. Patrick Porter, a neuroscience expert, award-winning author, and creator of BrainTap. Dr. Porter has been working in the field of psychology and mental wellness for decades and has been on the cutting edge of brainwave technology for over 30 years. BrainTap's digital tools and mind development apps use creative visualization and relaxation that have made tremendous advances in helping mental, physical, and emotional health issues. I'm excited to have Dr. Porter back on the podcast to dive deep into neuroscience, regulating the nervous system, improving brain function, breathwork, managing stress, anxiety, and burnout, and so much more. Dr. Porter, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a conversation about a year ago, and we went deep into BrainTap and your technology and all of the benefits and how it is helping people, on a level of mental wellness and managing stress and improving sleep and so much more. So I'm really excited to have you back on and really dive deeper into some of these topics. To get started, for those that are listening to this for the first time that maybe missed that first episode, and by the way, if anyone wants to go back, that's episode number 53 of the podcast to listen to that first conversation. But can you share a little bit more about what BrainTap is and what it does and why people use it?
Right. BrainTap, we're a brain fitness company. I think it's kind of a new genre. We believe that there's three waves to wellness. First is nutrition. Second is you got to get your body moving and breathing. So it's right in line with your podcast. And then number
Hmm.
three, we need to do something for brain fitness. So in my research, what I've been finding is that light, sound, and vibration are really good ways to entrain the brain. And the reason we need that is mostly because of chronic low level stress. So we're going to help people out of that stress response, but we can also use it for recovery and some other things. And we have some really exciting research that came out actually in this past year. So hopefully we'll delve into some of that to show people how we're not only using this for personal use, which is really exciting, but now we have 11 university studies that have completed over the last year. And each of those universities actually have selected a new study to go with in the future because of the results. So like things like PTSD or overcoming Alzheimer's or dementia, we have studies going on proving those things out and what we're doing.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah, it's so awesome to see that advancement in research. And like you said, just in the last year, there's already been so many studies, new things that you're discovering.
Mhm.
And, what's so cool about this entire field is that you have people using a tool that is now available to them to improve brain function, to manage stress better, to regulate their nervous system. Like you said, a lot of personal use, but then there's you know, universities that are using this, there's sports teams that are using this. Now you're
Mhm.
diving deeper into things like, memory loss or Alzheimer's. I mean, this is profound work that it's not just for your everyday individual that wants to feel better. It goes far, far beyond that, which is really exciting.
Yeah.
Cool.
So
I would love to chat a little bit more about what I would really want to get more into is the idea of the nervous system. I know we had touched on that a little bit in our first conversation, how we have the two sides of our nervous system, parasympathetic and sympathetic. And I get deep into this with breath work.
Mhm.
So can you tell us a little bit more about using BrainTap and how that can help regulate the nervous system?
Yeah, and breath is really important. So we do focus on that a lot with BrainTap. In fact, since we spoke, we now have there's 17 sessions with breathwork on the BrainTap app that,
Nice.
and we're always looking for more because people need more variety to build that neuroplasticity. But as we breathe in, we're going to trigger that sympathetic system, which is the fight or flight response. Most people talk about it. We call it the survivor brain. So unfortunately, over the last 2 years, people have been really stuck in that survivor brain because of the fear
Hmm.
porn that's out there, and people tuning into the news at all the wrong times. That basically, when you're in that state of mind, for the listeners that don't understand that, that's when your body, basically all the blood rushes from your digestive system out into your limbs because it thinks you're being chased by a tiger or something like that. It's a fear for your life. But we're just sitting behind the computer, or we're sitting watching television, and basically all these neurochemicals, which are designed to get us to, run as fast as we can or fight, whatever we're going to do. So what happens is the body, those are toxic then, because if we don't use it, most people don't understand that the liver actually can produce as much sugar during one stressful event as a candy bar. So when people who get diabetes, they go, I can't believe it. I don't even eat candy. Why do I have diabetes? Well, you're producing your own sugar because of stress. And that's a
Wow.
sympathetic response. We actually now have coined a term called sympathetic escape, because some people get so much into their sympathetic system, it locks up. And that's
Mm.
where breath work comes in, and brain tap and things like that, because we got to unlock that nervous system. If we don't, then we're all about flow, energy, and things of that nature.
Hmm.
So when we breathe out, that's why, like, some easy breath work is like breathing into the mental count of 4 and then breathe out to the count of 8. This kind of exercise, it's one of the ones I teach people to do at night if they're really stressed
Hmm.
out before they go to bed, so they can condition their body to get into that deep parasympathetic system. Parasympathetic is the state of the mind, and this is where BrainTap really excels, because we're teaching the brain through, when people think about brain waves and that, we have, just kind of put it into perspective for everyone. The electrical system of the brain is very sensitive, but we can't measure it outside of the brain. Really, we have to put some kind of uh, ways to connect to the brain, like a skull cap or some kind of instrument that will give us those readings. But our heart has a 14 to 18-foot range of magnetic. It's got a magnetic field. So we have this magnetic field, we have this electrical field, and these two are always interplaying with each other. They're not separate. The field works together. So when the heart is in a high sympathetic state, they actually have found that that energy field collapses,
Mm.
because it's basically, just like, if you could retract your walls and protect yourself, against what's going on. But when you're open and you're having fun, maybe you're in love or you're doing a creative outlet like artwork or gardening or something, then this energy field really expands. In fact, we can measure. There was a study done just recently where everybody on earth, every living thing, and actually almost every inanimate object, actually is projecting energy. We're actually, even though we're through the computer, our body is transmitting infrared light all the
Hmm.
time. Between the ranges of 800 nanometers and 860 nanometer light, every person does this. It's not just the holy people you see on the television or in your holy books that has an aura around them. Everyone has this corona discharge. That's why we can see them at night with night vision goggles, because
Hmm.
we have this discharge. That heat that we're seeing is actually infrared light. So they have shown that when you're in a parasympathetic state, you actually produce 200 times more photic energy as an individual. So when somebody walks in the room and said, hey, they light up the room, they're really, that's a true statement. And then there are other people, of course, that, the lights dim when they come in because they're so stressed out or negative. So when you're in that
Hmm.
parasympathetic state, everything seems to flow better. Now, if we look at brainwaves and how these work, the brainwave of beta, which is between the ranges of 12 and 20 cycles, or maybe even up to 30, depending upon the books you're reading. That beta brain has to do with that fight or flight, that reactionary brain. Now we need that. It's not like a villain, but we need it in balance. But when we're in
Right.
the parasympathetic state, there's two brain waves that are really associated with it, primarily are alpha and theta when we're awake. So, and maybe even gamma when we're talking about flow states and things of that nature. So when this balance happens with these brain waves, now we have this nice heart coherence, which people can measure with their smart devices. We can measure heart rate variability, which means that you can get angry, get relaxed, you can be relaxed, and then go out and run a mile or run 100 yards, whatever it needs to happen. If those people that can't regulate that nervous system, that's what's happening right now. And it has to do with, there's a connection between our heart, our breath, and our brain. And
Hmm.
if these three aren't like coordinated together, then there's a disconnect. If you look at every negative emotion out there,
Yeah.
it all has one thing in common: they stop breathing, right? We've
Mm.
all seen little kids, or if you have a son or daughter or family member or grandson or granddaughter, when they come running up and they're angry and you go, just breathe, just breathe. They get angrier because they know as soon as they breathe, they're going to lose that anger. It's going to
Right.
leave their body because so if we learn to breathe through these processes. So what BrainTap does in essence is puts us into a physiological condition that's much like a flow state. Um, but you're not doing anything because the brain reacts to these things. And we can talk a little bit more
Hmm.
about that in a moment. But we're always responding to our environment. Even when we're around people we love and appreciate, we just have more fun. We're free to speak and whatever. When we're around people that we know are judgmental or negative, or maybe people of authority, we'll tend to shut down that system. So it's all about knowing, where you're at physiologically and knowing that the brain plays a big part of it. So with
Mm.
BrainTap, we're teaching people to practice these different states. And the neat thing is that we can talk a little bit about the research of it, but we've actually shown how the brain fitness works and how long it lasts over time instead of just guessing. A lot of people guess or they do a certain practice and they go, yeah, I feel better. But is there something we can document? And now we have a piece of equipment called Neurocheck, which we've been using for the last 10 years, that actually shows 9 parameters of the nervous system. And these things
Mm.
can be measured now. In back when I first started, of course, in the 80s, there was no measurements like this. There was only
Right.
there was no neurofeedback really. There were some people doing it, of course, in laboratories, but we didn't know. But respiration, breath rate, temperature, these were the kind of things we would measure. And now we can actually measure down to how many volts we have in the different regions of the brain and things of that nature.
Mm. So many good things you had just mentioned. You talked about how whenever there's a negative emotion, it leads to us kind of freezing up and not breathing.
Mhm.
I'm gonna say something that I think is my perception of what's going on there, and then you can tell me whether that's right or wrong.
Mhm. Mhm.
So when we have negative emotions, that all stems from one emotion, which is fear.
Mhm.
When we get into a state of fear, that's really when we're getting into that sympathetic system,
Mhm.
that fight or flight, and then we tense up and we forget to breathe almost. Would that be an accurate
Sure.
portrayal?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people out there probably have been in situations where you've been talking with somebody, and all of a sudden you go, you kind of catch your breath because you were listening. People don't realize when you're speaking, other people, if they haven't trained themselves, will hold their breath until you're done
Mm.
because they're listening. That's the way the system works. So fear is a big, I mean, I talk about it in my first book, Awaken the Genius. The biggest deterrent to evolution is fear.
Yeah.
And that's because our primitive brain, they call it the reticular activating system, is designed to keep you alive. And of course, 200,000 years ago, when we had to worry about all the animals that might eat us for dinner, we had a
Mm.
lot more to be scared about, right? So our this part of our brain is always observing our environment, saying, hey, is this safe here? Am I okay to do this? And it's basically has a negative bent. That's why negative news is so popular. I mean, they tried to do positive news networks and nobody would watch it. It's crazy.
Mm.
You'd think
Yeah.
everybody would want to know about the positive news. Of course, we want to know about our family and friends and what they've done that's positive, but we could care less if somebody down the road did something
Right.
really good. So it's all about really protecting us. It's not that our brain is wrong or broken. It's just so we have to work at that. We have to work at changing our perception of reality so we can
Mhm.
see a safe environment, even when it might be for other people not so safe. The more we have built up those mental skills, the more flexible we can be.
Yeah, that makes sense. And much of what you're talking about is the importance of that balance of the nervous system, right? So
Right?
we have moments where we'll have stressful moments. Like that's part of life. We're human. We're not going to avoid that entirely, but it's about being aware of it and having a tool to get back into a state where you can get more into the rest and digest and get more calm and relax.
Mhm,
And that's what it's all about, is that balance. And it's why I really enjoy, whether it's breath work, or we've talked in our last conversation about cold exposure
mhm,
and putting yourself into that state of hormesis, that hormetic
mhm,
stress. You talked about the low grade chronic stress, which we
mhm,
experience throughout our weeks, throughout our days.
mhm.
Uh, but spending some intentional time in that state of hormetic stress so that you can train your body, train your mind to handle real life stress every day.
Yeah. Well, they've proven that that's how you build resilience. You don't build resilience by avoiding stress. You
Yeah,
build
right.
just like we can't build our bodies by going to the gym and not stressing out our muscles. We
Yes.
have to stress our nervous system. And
Yeah.
when somebody has a heart attack at, let's say, 47 or 50 years old, and everybody goes, I can't believe Jimmy had a heart attack. He never got angry. Well, Jimmy should have got angry. You know,
Mm.
we not that he should have got angry, but he should have done something to stress out his system, like you're saying. We need to, we're really designed to be, I love when I see distance runners because our body's not designed to do distance running. They'd be better off to do what we used to call fartleks in college, where
Hmm.
you would sprint and then walk, sprint and then walk, sprint and then walk, because that's the way we're designed. We're out
Right.
there hunting and gathering, but that stress and then that recovery, that stress and that recovery. The stress is really important, but the recovery is equally important. I don't know if I told you about what we did with Kansas City Sport, which is a professional soccer team. Um, but you can measure, if you're wondering how you're recovering, there's an easy way to do that if you have HRV. That could be a
Hmm.
smartwatch or whatever, is do a measurement before you do your workout, measure yourself right after the workout, see what's going on, and then measure yourself in 4 hours. If you're not back to your baseline in 4 hours, you've overstressed your nervous system. Which
Mm.
at first, when you're first training, that's probably going to happen. But when we're talking about Olympic athletes or professional athletes, that 4 hours, they should be back to normal. So we showed them was by recovering with a tool like BrainTap, they were able to get the same recovery in 20 minutes that it would take 4 hours, because it's all about regulating the nervous system. The nervous system is stressed out. It's wondering what's going on. It's trying to adapt. We have this adaptive nervous system. We go outside and it's cold. We start to shiver, to warm up our bones. And if it's hot, we start to sweat. That's a kind of an outpouring of what's happening. So the more behavioral flexibility, there's in systems technology, and NLP is one of those, neuro linguistic programming, which I'm trained in. They will say the part of the system that's the most flexible controls the system.
Mm.
So if you can control your nervous system, like going into the ice bath. A lot of people can't do that. Or they don't, the fear of it is so big that they won't do that, right? Everybody can
Yep.
probably do it. My wife has vagal sympathy, which she tried to do, put her hand in a bucket of ice, she passed out. So some
Hmm.
people, they just, their nervous system, and she needs more vagal tone, right? So we had
Hmm.
to get a vagal tone stimulator, but breathing does that. And so does humming and, using different things. So there's a lot of ways to condition the nervous system. Most people are walking around, they don't even know their nervous system needs a tune-up,
Yeah.
because
Or it
they don't even know
exists.
how. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. They're
yeah. People
sometimes not
wake up
even
and they go,
aware of it.
I don't,
Yeah.
yeah. They go, I don't know how I feel. Let me turn on the news. It's like
Yeah.
we need, people need to tune in. That's why grounding is so important, even first thing in the morning, because our
Hmm.
biological system needs to know, hey, where are we at in space and time? Is this evening, morning? What's going on? And then when we're inside our house with artificial light, we can fake out our nervous system quite often.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I've always been a big fan of grounding, whether it's bare feet on the ground or, even the cold exposure is a form of grounding, getting into
Mhm,
natural body of water. So
mhm,
many health benefits to it.
yeah,
You have mentioned a few times here the different levels of brainwave activity. Can you walk us through the 5 different levels of brainwave activity, what each one is, and a little
sure.
bit more about each of them?
Yeah, let's start at the basement. That's delta. Delta is the brainwave that is most associated with sleep, but during sleep, we're not staying in delta all the time. There's these what we call delta burst. Every time you have a delta burst, which is the deepest level of delta, your brain will open up the glial lymphomic system. So it triggers the body. Each one of these brain waves tells the body a lot of different information, but the main information that the glial lymphomic system, that when you're in delta, says is, hey, we're not moving anymore. It's safe to open up this this part of the brain, just like we have protection to get nutrients and things into the brain, we actually hold back the toxins. So in order to get that, really detox the brain and get rid of, if you have leaky gut, a lot of people have heard of that out there.
Hmm.
They now know if you have leaky gut, you have leaky brain, because we have brain biome, just like we'd have gut biome. So, that's where sleep comes in. So deep sleep is really important, that brain wave. Now, we should not have delta while we're awake. Unfortunately, anybody who's ever had one of our scans or had an EEG, you've probably been told, why do you have so much delta? Because almost everyone out there, except for biohackers, I mean, when we go to biohacking conventions, we're so pleased to see the brainwaves, because even though they might not be doing brain entrainment, they're doing everything else. They're taking care of their body physically. They have a positive mental attitude. They're tracking, and their delta tends to be less. That delta brainwave should be less than 10% of your overall brainwave activity when you're awake. Now, when you're
Hmm.
asleep, it should be 90% or more. Now, when the next level up is called theta. Theta is a very small brainwave. I mean, delta is from 0 to 4, just so you know, and then 4 to 7 is theta. These are cycles per second. So these are Earth frequencies. Just to put it in perspective, G5 is 1 million cycles per second, or 50
Wow.
million cycles per second, depending upon what you read. So that means the cells of your body are trying to figure out, what the heck is this? Our body is designed to interface with Earth frequencies, which are from 0.05 to 100. So anything in that range, our body is okay with. Anything above that range will put us into a cell danger response. That's why some people have this interference with different radio frequencies, like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, these kind of things. And there are a lot of ways you can offset that, but when you're in theta, theta is most notably known for its inventive nature. When somebody has a problem in their life and they have a dream about it, a prophetic dream, or we look at inventors, they're tapping into that. Someone who is also just to kind of backtrack, delta is the one that triggers the gut to make serotonin. Theta is the brainwave activity that tells the body to produce GABA. Uh,
Hmm.
GABA is the precursor to DMT. So people who are out there doing plant-based medicine and things like that. I don't know if I talked in the last one about our psilocybin study.
No, but I would
So
love to get into that.
yeah. So when we were asked, and this was in Dallas, Texas, with Dr. David Rosenthal, who did the study with the vets, and he said, I want to do BrainTap and a psilocybin. I said, wow, that's cool. But I'd never done psilocybin at that time, so I didn't
Hmm.
know. I've done it since, just to have the experience, low dose
Hmm.
psilocybin. So I didn't have the trip like,
Microdose.
yeah.
Yep.
And then in the microdosing, and then what we did was, these were big doses. So some
Yeah.
of the vets did not want to do it because they were afraid they were addicts, and they were afraid they get addicted. So we brain mapped the people, and what we found was a large amount of the brain was in theta and gamma.
Mm.
In both theta and gamma, which we're going to talk about in a moment, both produce, or gamma, I should say, gamma and theta both produce GABA. GABA,
Wow.
that precursor to DMT, we had people, once we mapped it, and we now on BrainTap, we have a whole series for gamma. People are telling us they're having a psilocybin trips without a psilocybin, because we mapped the brain, and we created a series that maps how the brain operates in
Hmm.
those states. And what we know with gamma, when we're talking about it, is that's the one they now associated with breaking down amyloid plaque and keeping the brain tuned up. So think of gamma like a bass drum. So they used to think theta was that. Theta is to some degree, but theta is a very small brainwave frequency from 4 to 7. Gamma
Hmm.
is 30 to 100. So it's a
Hmm.
wider range. And they now associate that with, what we call flow states, or anytime they do, when we measure any of the gurus and things like that, that we get a chance to do when we go to India, we see a heightened amount of gamma. I've seen, just the other day, we were at an event in Nashville, and we were doing a scan with somebody, and that person had over 37% gamma. I've never seen that,
Wow.
just without any training. I mean,
Wow.
and they said that they're like a spiritual healer and intuitive. So they're out there in some other realm, that most brains don't operate in. Not that you can't train to that, but it's one of those things. And then, so we got theta there, and so as it's producing GABA, you're going to get more visualization, relaxation processes done. That's the one most adults are missing.
Hmm.
Theta, that's why they don't sleep. Two out of
Yeah.
three Americans in the world are not sleeping. It's not because they don't have enough delta. It's because they don't have enough theta. Think of each brainwave like a radio dial. It's not digital. It's not this and this. It's got to flow through one to the other. So to get to
Hmm.
delta, you have to go through theta. You can't, it's not like you can beam yourself over to, like on Star Trek or something. You got to take the car across the highway and get to that place. So
Yeah.
in between theta and beta, there's a brainwave called alpha. Alpha is probably the one that gets the most activity out there because 10 hertz frequency happens to be the neutral of the brain. So if somebody's brain is regulating correctly and you're not doing anything, you're just kind of hanging out, it's 10 hertz frequency. That's why our electricity is 60 hertz. That happens to be 10 hertz frequency when you measure it. So all of our electricity in our home, all of that, because they found out that people could handle that, pretty
Hmm.
easily. We've had electricity for over 100 years and hasn't caused the problems that like a 3G or 5G has done because
Hmm.
of the frequency is more in harmony with our body. And then that's an intuitive one. So it's also where you go when you're falling in love and it's also part of the future pacing of what we do. When we go back, theta should be about less than between 15 and 10%, but alpha should be about 30% of your brainwave activity because we need to have even everyday driving. Let's say driving down the road, we don't think about it because if you're a driver, you've driven so many times, you're driving one-handed, talking to the radio, listen to the radio, talking to people in your car. You're really not present that much, but you're navigating with the car because everything is unconscious. You've learned to
Hmm.
do it so well, you're unconsciously competent. But so when we go into this alpha state, it's kind of a daydreaming, relaxing state. But they also associate that with when you fall in love and when you're doing things you enjoy. This is where where Einstein said, "Hey, if you're around a beautiful woman for an hour, it'll seem like a minute. If you're sitting on a hot stove for a minute, it'll seem like an hour." That's because the brain is different in these different states. So when we get into beta, we need beta. It's not like I said, when we're actively engaged, like we're talking now, and if you were in a classroom experience or you were doing something that took some cognitive thinking, you would need beta. Between beta and alpha, there's actually a brainwave called SMR, sensory motor rhythm. That's the one as we get better looking and more intelligent with age. That's the one that atrophies. So when we talk about our dementia study and things like that, that's the brainwave we're training to because it's so important. And when we age, that one seems to atrophy and it has to do with balance and vestibular system. So, but so when we think about these six different brainwaves, really, um, gamma is now considered the bass drum, 40 hertz frequency, and everything else kind of like the drum master. It keeps everything else in tune. If you don't have gamma now, they're saying that with the what will happen with the gamma program is that your brain will fill up with amyloid plaque and you might get disease. That's what they're proving out at
Hmm.
MIT. There's no real evidence yet to talk about that in a big way, but there is for rats, rats and mice. They've proven that out. So we need to prove it out with people. Now we've done several studies, which we can talk about in a moment if you'd like, but we have a bigger study now going on with dementia where a 6-week protocol with BrainTap and we took people off the dementia scale, so
Wow.
that it is possible.
Yeah. Gosh, so many good things there, and all of those topics are right up my alley in terms of what I'm passionate about, and what I not only talk about on this podcast, but what I incorporate into my life and my lifestyle. I would love to dive deeper on. You talked about psilocybin. Can you talk again what the level was with the plant medicine that you were talking about?
Well,
What
almost
was?
every, yeah, whether you're doing DMT or psilocybin or something like that, what we've
Mhm.
noticed is the brain will reorganize. You'll get neuroplasticity with it, even though you're not doing any stimulus other than internally, right? So you're doing this
Right.
internal stimulus, but the brain interacts with it. Most people don't understand that all medicine is interactive medicine. The medicine itself does not do anything. The medicine's inert, but our brain reacts with it. So we have receptors. So we have a psilocybin receptors, we have DMT receptors, we have opioid receptors. All of these
Mhm.
receptors in the brain, if we didn't have receptors, we would just eat it, it would go out of the body. No, it wouldn't even do anything to us. But what happens when we trigger these receptors, it starts a cascade of different activities. So the brain, the biological system is triggering the electrical system, which is that sympathetic parasympathetic drive. And the
Hmm.
neurohormonal system is kind of the backup system of the body, but it still controls, we should really be balanced in all those three areas. So when we put a psilocybin in to the system, or we put in DMT or acid or LSD and all these kind of things, what happens is the brain, because the reality is everything we perceive through our eyes, ears, smell, touch, all of our senses isn't real. It's all, that's why if we have five people see an accident, five different people tell the story, because it's all from their perception. So what is your perception? So that's why in these studies they always say set and setting is so important. How
Hmm.
did they set it up? Do you have relaxing music? Do you feel safe? They do know
Hmm.
that there's a correlation between somebody feeling safe and feeling fear-based when they're doing it. So those
Hmm.
emotions are kind of precursors to the experience. And I'm fortunate now that I have several researchers that are now going into plant-based medicine. So we're getting a lot more information about that. And the incredible
Yeah.
thing is that most of these kind of experiences, they reorganize the brain. They have an experience of basically firing up the nervous system in such a way. The nervous system, 70% of it's in the brain. So when you talk about firing up the nervous system and really rewiring the brain, it's a chemical way to do it. It's just done
Hmm.
with plant-based medicine. It's healthy and it will flush out of the system. And most of these plant-based medicines, even though people are afraid to get addicted, like I said, there's been no case of that. It's like they
Right.
use substances to actually get people off addiction,
Right.
if
Right.
you have different problems. And I think it's because the brain finally gets, they don't really know yet. They just know the interactions, but I think it's because the brain finally gets that connection again. When we're born, they used to think, hey, we're born, we're going to reconnect, we're going to connect our brain and we're going to learn all this. But the reality is when we're born, we're fully connected. And so we actually unplug to remember things. We don't plug in
Mm.
to remember things. So
Mm.
once we get those neural networks, and I like to use the example of language, because language is something we all take for granted. But like my science officer, he speaks 6 languages. And when we were going through India for 3 weeks, by the time we left India, he's speaking Hindi. And I said,
Hmm.
Francisco, when did you learn Hindi? He goes, I didn't. We've just been here for 3 weeks, so I picked up the language.
Wow.
His brain circuit did not shut down like mine. When I grew up, I learned English, and then it was hard as hell to learn Spanish to get through college. That was
Yeah.
because that circuit shut down because the brain is an energy hog, and it says, "Wow, we don't need that energy to learn languages anymore. We already know the language of our tribe. We don't need to learn anymore. Let's shut that down and conserve energy." Where like Francisco's, because he learned so many languages, he's from Brazil, and like European countries, they're used to learning 2 and 3 languages. Now that
Hmm.
circuit stays up, and it's easier to learn those things.
Is there a way to open that circuit back up for you and I? Because I'm the same way. I've learned a little bit of Spanish throughout my life, but certainly not conversational or fluent. But what are some ways we can maybe open that circuit back up to learn faster or more easy?
Well, one thing we know when you're a child learning a language before 6 years old, your primary brainwaves are delta and theta. Those are your primary brainwaves. So when we do language training, we always
Hmm.
tell people listen in theta. Like our accelerated learning series, they call that hypermnesia, by the way, super memory. Everybody's brain has it. When we're in those states, we remember everything. And
Hmm.
the reality is that we all remember everything. It's just our recall of that information isn't so good. So what we're talking about is like with the language, if we can get our physiological state into the same state we were at when we were learning a language, we should be able to learn that language again. In fact, John Grinder, and he was a linguist, so he would go and sit in. He might get arrested nowadays because of everybody's so paranoid about what's going on. But he used to go to the playgrounds and hang out with the kids and kind of mimic them physiologically, speak like them, and he could pick up a language really
Mm.
quickly because
Wow.
we don't learn languages the way they teach us. We're basically object oriented, kind of like the computer screen. We have graphic user interfaces, and if we can learn, like when let's say we go to France, we want to speak French, we're going to want to know, you know, how do we say coffee or restaurant or hotel?
Hmm.
We don't care about all the other stuff, and all the other little filler language kind of comes in. And so I think the big thing is to, uh, and we've done this a lot with these immersion. We have BrainTap being used in some immersion therapies. And what it is once you learn anything, you're stressing out the brain. Now you need recovery. That's when you need to do something like a brain tap, do a breath session, do something to downregulate the nervous system, because the hippocampus during times of rest will take everything you've collected during that before that rest, and it's going to now take it from short-term memory to long-term memory. And it's going to build the neural pathways to that information. But if we stay constantly in a habitual state of stress, the brain never gets a chance to sort, organized. It's kind of like having a dirty desk, and we never get a chance to clean the desk because we just keep piling stuff on a desk. We need to take that time to relax, let go, and let the brain organize itself. And when we
Hmm.
do, we have a good memory.
Yeah. Gosh, it's fascinating. I also would love to hear more about, you talked about the studies around dementia and Alzheimer's. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's happening there with your current work?
Yeah. What we found with Alzheimer's is that we need to do a lot more light therapy to get their brain to make the change because they don't have energy. And so one of the best ways is to use infrared and red light, 660 to, 860 nanometer light. And the brain responds really well to that. We need energy to make these changes. So
Hmm.
with Alzheimer's, we've done that. We're in the middle of an Alzheimer's study, but in our dementia, which is if we can catch it early, just like every disease, except for COVID. You don't want to catch that early, right? It's crazy. Every disease, if you catch it early, you're going to have a better chance. So with dementia, if we can catch somebody just on the onset of dementia, then we know that within 6 weeks we can turn that around. We have a bigger study going on. The way the study worked, the first study was done by Dr. Kelly Miller, who wrote a book, Saving Your Brain. And in that book, he talks about brain tap to the rescue, because what it is you can do all the neurological work, but if you don't get the brain exercising, those neurons are not going to learn to, basically fire and wire together and then wire and fire together. That whole thing works with Hebb's law, right? So what we
Yep.
did is we measured the brains. We used EEG, HRV. We used cognitive testing. We had their doctors diagnose them. Every person in our pilot study was diagnosed with dementia. Every one of them took the cognitive skills test. They all tested as having dementia. Their
Well,
brain, the weird thing that we found out that now is kind of normal for us is the ADD brain, the dementia brain, they're pretty much the same. The
hmm.
brain is out of balance. The left hemisphere is moving slower than the right hemisphere. So we designed a series of sessions that we call New Mind, uh, because these people felt like they got a new mind because they got it back. Is we actually sped up the left hemisphere, slowed down the right hemisphere. It took about 6 weeks to get them to match. Once you get them to match, then as long as you do something like brain tap 3 times a week, you can maintain it. So after 6 weeks, we sent them back to their doctor. Their doctor did the skills test with them and said, "Wow, what happened? You don't have dementia anymore." And they said, "Oh,
Hmm.
I'm doing this thing called brain tap, the light sound." Oh no, it can't be that. Doctors are so funny because it's so simple. There's a saying, "Man is simple." Spirit's simple, man is complex. It's got to be much more difficult. So,
Hmm.
but anyway, they couldn't argue. They're no longer on the dementia scale. They took the test. They no longer scored it. We measured their brain. And now they had matching hemispheres. But the biggest thing that we measured with this device he has, the device is actually called New Mind as well. It's a neurofeedback device and EEG, QEEG. And what we found was we could measure neuroplasticity. Now, what we mean by that is we can measure energy in the brain. That
Hmm.
energy then correlates to how much ATP production, how much neurons are firing, all of those things. So we actually found an average of 49% neurological improvement in 6 weeks by doing the brain tap three times a day. And the
Hmm.
reason we need to do it 3 times a day is in the morning, we need to teach the brain to have more of that SMR brainwave. So we call that digital coffee. These are wake up sessions that wake up the brain. In the middle of the day, we need a recovery session. So what we do is we have them listen to a deep theta training at that time, or they can choose to do a gamma session. Either one of those are
Hmm.
going to do the same thing. What we did is we rotated, and we had them do either one, but they got a choice. And then at night we had them do a delta session because we needed to teach their brain to shut off. Unfortunately, with 2/3 of America not sleeping, we know the brain is just not disengaging at night. It just stays,
Hmm.
people start doing their math or doing their checkbook in their mind or their bills or what they have to do tomorrow. And that's a time to just put all that into a state of abeyance and go to sleep. So once we did that, and it was so simple that we told the members of the study, we said, hey, if you want to keep doing BrainTap, then keep doing it. Uh, I know now it's been over a year and they still have the same change. They're still doing great because we're following the study. But now it's in we're it could be started already, but we were looking, they were recruiting 40 to 50 people down at Seminole College in Florida. It's just outside of Orlando. And
Hmm.
we have a brain center there, which is really cool now. At Seminole College, if you go to their website, you'll see they have BrainTap in their website now because we used it for their golf team. I think we
Nice.
talked about that in the last one where their golf team was now 3 years in a row national champions. And they
Wow.
actually when they bring in golfers for the school, they show them how they work with mental health. They gave us a whole wing. It's like 3 rooms that have BrainTap in it, and
Nice.
neurofeedback equipment and all that kind of stuff.
That's amazing. So I know you had mentioned earlier, I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, on the brain wave level, was it theta that you said most people are not spending enough time in theta?
Right. Most people have very little. That's why they can't sleep. Just like an
Yeah.
autistic child would have no alpha, most adults have no theta.
Yeah. And so what would be some examples of us spending more time in theta? With that, you said visualization, meditation. How
And
can
getting
we add
close to
more?
nature, getting out and doing nature walks. Um, if you can get up into the mountains, the actual frequency of a mountaintop is 7.8 hertz. So
Mm,
they call it the Schumann frequency, but that's when
mhm.
you're away from all civilization. If you can get away from it all, and go to when you're around a body of water, typically that's about 10 hertz frequency. But if you can
Okay.
get into the forest, in Japan they actually call it forest bathing.
That's
Where
right.
you and they do
Shinrin
know that.
Yoku.
Yeah, and they do know that your physiology responds by creating different neurochemicals and things like that that make you feel good. You get a healthy benefit. It's not just walking through the woods. Your body interacts with all the plants and the light and
Hmm.
all the gravity and things like that. There's something to it being outside of your home.
Do we know if there's any correlation to a lack of theta and then maybe later on having memory loss, dementia, Alzheimer's? Is there any correlation there?
Oh yeah, big time because you're not sleeping. If
You're
you're
not
not
sleeping.
sleeping, when you think about sleep, sleep isn't just a time to, recover. It's the only time to recover. I mean, so for most people, they
Hmm.
don't do any other
Hmm.
thing but sleep. And that's also the time where we build up all our neurotransmitter bank accounts, like the 54
Mm.
different neurotransmitters. Our study that we're going and doing in Brazil right now, which is a digital drug study that the Invisa, which is their FDA, is putting on, we're showing that we modulate 54 different neurotransmitters with BrainTap. And that should happen for everyone without the BrainTap during sleep. But what happens
Right.
is because they're not sleeping right, they're not they're not regulating those neurotransmitters. So that's why biohackers are always trying to figure out how can we do this. I don't think you can hack sleep by getting deeper sleep, better sleep, but you can't eliminate sleep. You need sleep, and that's why so much time is given to that. I always tell people it's your incubator for superpowers. If you don't
Hmm.
have that sleep, you're not going to think well. You're not going to physically be well. In fact, they say 3 nights of poor sleep is equivalent to drinking a 6 pack. So
Whoa.
that's where your brain functions. So sleep is very crucial, and that's how we get these different brain waves going. Because during
Yeah.
sleep too, by the way, for the people wondering why is that, when you're sleeping, you're going to downregulate beta. So you're not going to be in beta. If you're in beta, you're awake, but you can be in alpha and theta and delta while you're sleeping. In fact, you go through these cycles. Some
Hmm.
people will say you go through 7 to 9 cycles at night, and as long as you wake up on an up cycle, you're going to have energy. Even if you're in bed for 12 hours and you wake up on a down cycle, you're going to be tired because the
Hmm.
it's just the way we cycle. It's kind of like a battery cycling. We are an energy system. So if our energy is on an upswing and we wake up, that upswing kind of carries us through the day. And if
Sure.
you everyone knows everyone if they're wondering what that is, a good way to do that. Deepak Chopra talked about this in his book years ago, where when you don't have to get up, go to sleep at a normal hour. don't stay up too late, but a normal hour, take 3 days in a row that you can just wake up on your own terms. But as soon as you get up, instead of looking at the alarm clock going, oh, I got 2 more hours or I got another hour, jump out of bed. You'll find that eventually you won't need an alarm clock anymore. That's the time you
Hmm.
sleep. So if you need 7 hours, you need 9 hours, or somewhere in between there, you know how much time you need, and you'll get that recovery that's most sought after during sleep.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about lucid dreaming? What's happening
That's
with lucid
Theta.
dreaming? That's
That's
theta.
Theta. Yeah. So when
Okay.
people tell me, if I meet somebody who says, I don't dream, I'll say, okay, let's do a brain scan. I know I'm not going to see any theta because the
Hmm.
precursors, GABA creates DMT, which creates hallucinations in the brain.
Hmm.
So, or not hallucinations, but dreaming. You have this lucid dreaming. So as long as you have high theta, like somebody, when I scan them, and let's say somebody has 30% theta, which a lot of people do out there, and they'll say, how's your dreaming? Oh, it's so crazy. It's just like real life. I'm just there all the time. That's because they have so much theta that even though they're not physically there, they're mentally in this other world. And it's
Hmm.
just as real as this one to them while they're dreaming. I've probably had hundreds of people that have told me that, and the correlation is high theta.
Got it. Super interesting. This is a little bit more of a complex question, but I feel like it ties in so nicely to what we're talking about, and that would be the human spirit, the soul.
Mhm,
What do you think? And I know you were talking about energy and how everything is energy.
mhm.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on what happens to us when we leave here on Earth. What do you think happens?
Well, I believe that energy never dies. It's
Hmm.
somehow recreated and translated, whatever. I've had experiences on my own where I had a spiritual awakening where I had a bisulfite poisoning and something healed me, which I don't know. I mean, I was brought up Catholic, so I only had that framework to kind of work with,
Same.
so I know.
Yeah, I was as well.
Yeah, so I didn't know what the heck was going on. But after this being of light left my room, I was healed. And that happened
Yeah.
in 84.
Yeah.
And ever since then, I've been trying to figure that out. But I lost all fear of death. And I think that when in my research, what they tell me is that we lose a quarter of an ounce when we die.
Mm.
Now, what is that quarter of an ounce? Where does it go? What does it do? I don't have that information, but I do know that they've weighed and measured people upon their death, and that seems to be whatever that is, that energy that is us, that not our bodies. We're not our bodies. The Sufi masters would say the seer is never the seen,
Hmm.
and so when you think about we're not the body, we're whatever animates the body, you know, because we don't control the body. We're a passenger here. We can take care of the body just like we take care of our cars, but we can lose our hand and still be us.
Hmm.
If we were our body, if we lost our hand, we'd lose a piece of ourselves, which some people
Right.
might say that. So I believe that this is not the end. I mean, even the most devout Christian needs to read the Bible, and it says, "In my Father's house there's many mansions, and I go to prepare a place for you." My background was Christian psychology until that happened to me, and then I thought maybe there's more out there. I'm more
Hmm.
open. Of course, when you brought up Catholic and Christian, you stay that way. But the unless something really drastic happens, but I do. I'm not one of those that says it's this way or the highway. I think in an
Right.
infinite world of infinite possibilities, there's more than one way to get to where you're going to go. That would be for a benevolent, loving God. I don't think there would be only one way. That would be
Hmm.
ridiculous.
Hmm.
So.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. Yeah, I'm very much like you. Was raised Catholic, and since then, I still consider myself Christian, but I also expand that thinking around what's possible and where do we go and what happens and who are we as beings. And
Mhm.
it's super fascinating stuff. I haven't had a near death experience, but I absolutely understand just from people like yourself or other people that have had near death experiences and realizing that there's more to it than just our time on earth and then that's it.
When Danon Brinkley, I spoke with him years ago. He wrote the book Saved by the Light. He was hit by lightning twice and had two near-death
Whoa.
experiences. And the
Whoa.
reason it interested me was when I came back from whatever happened to me. I was just healed. I don't think I was dying. I wasn't like a near death, but I had bisulfite poisoning so bad you'd think I had severe Parkinson's. I mean,
Wow.
I could hardly talk and I could hardly walk, but I didn't fear that I was going to die. But I didn't know how I was going to live that way either. But what he saw, what they told him was to develop these places for relaxation. In his book, he
Hmm.
talks about it. He said they told him go back to Earth, and he's never done it. When I met with him, I said, that's what we do. We create.
Yeah.
I came back with that information. I had to do this, what I was doing, because there's too much stress on our planet,
Yeah.
and there is a solution. And it's not what you think. It can be much easier to be done than what people believe, but it does take practice. So,
Hmm.
we believe that, like what you're doing with breath work, that's a key component to it, and that's going to prepare. Most people don't know that yoga was designed to prepare you for meditation. All the
Mm.
one of the studies that you would probably be interested in, they just published at PubMed. We did a pranayama breathing technique where we showed by doing this breathing technique, you could match the two hemispheres, just like we did in the dementia study, but we did it with
Yeah.
breath. Because we always want to look at what is ancient traditions and modern technology doing. So they could do this with ancient traditions. It just takes a lot
Hmm.
more work, So we had these people, matching the two hemispheres, because when you get older, what happens is they dysregulate. But breath is a key component to getting the physiology to work together. So that
Yes.
was a pretty incredible. I've had 3 papers published on breath work with Ames Institute, the All Indian Institute of Medical Sciences. It's their Dr. Varun. He's the head of physiology there. We do, he uses our equipment and we work together. But we did this one without the BrainTap. This was just with breath work, and people were able
Hmm.
to get their brains to match.
Amazing. Yeah, I really never thought as I went down my journey of health and wellness in these last few years, I really never thought that I would bridge the gap of health, like breath work and yoga and meditation and so many of the things that we're talking about right now, and bridge that with spirituality and in science.
Mhm,
All of it can be one,
mhm,
and I think that's part of why we've been talking about our upbringing with faith. And for me, not that it was necessarily a turnoff, but in a way with Catholicism, it was like very black and white. And, a lot of people think that science and religion can't exist, or spirituality, whatever word you want to use.
right.
And the more I learn about all these different things we're talking about, pranayama, breath work, yoga, meditation, all of it, grounding, it's all one. It's all, there's so much correlation between
Right.
everything. And it all comes down to what we've been talking about, which is energy. It's really
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah. One of my mentors told me very early on that, and I still hold that to be true today, is that we're spiritual beings on a physical journey. We're not physical beings trying
Hmm.
to be spiritual. That's the big
Hmm.
misconception. That's the big lie
Hmm.
that's out there right now.
Yeah.
We're not these physical bodies, because if we were, we would last longer than 100 years, or 120 years, as some people say. So these bodies are just temporary. But
Hmm.
where's our true home? Where do we come
Hmm.
from? We don't know that yet. I mean, hopefully, as we tune more into our true selves, we'll figure that out more and more. We'll have an insight into that. But I do know there's a greater clarity, like plant-based medicine. Most people that
Hmm.
have a fear of death, like when they're doing the studies with people who are, terminally cancer or something like that, once they get a glimpse of the reality of this expanded states of consciousness, they don't fear death anymore.
Hmm.
There's nothing to fear, because it's just an extension. I like Parahansi Yogananda said, he goes, we should be crying when we're born and celebrating when we die. So that's kind of, it's just all the way that we think about things. We don't. It's the uncertainty that causes us the fear. We don't know what's going to happen. The uncertainty of that. But once we have that certainty because of an experience, then we're okay with it. We can die with dignity instead of being so pinned up in the stress and anxiety and the mistrust and things of that nature.
Mm. So well said. Fantastic. I know you had mentioned towards the beginning of our conversation, there were some new studies that you are involved with. You said there's 11 different universities. Can you talk a little bit more about what's going on there?
Yeah. Well, the one that I think we have time for here is I think we're going to change the way people work with traumatic brain injuries,
Hmm.
because we did a study with a high school in Michigan, And that high school, Dr. Ted Arkefeld is the doctor. And what he did is any student from cheerleaders to football players that got a concussion, they were put through his protocol. So everybody got treated. Nobody didn't get treated. But 50% of them, while they were doing the Neurocheck boots, because they were doing this lymphatic drainage, while they were doing those boots, they would do BrainTap. That's the only thing they did differently. They followed them for a year after their treatment. So they returned to play a year afterwards, and they did all the neurological markers. And this is what we published, which is now available actually online on Amazon. We have a book called Studies of Brain Fitness with BrainTap Technologies. We published the 11 studies. And in that study, what we showed was for instance, most people were between 50 and 70% better in every neurological function if they used the BrainTap. The only thing that was lower than that was there was a 30% less headaches with the BrainTap group than the other group. But everything else, from flexibility to cognitive thinking to other things, we have it all marked out there. But the amazing thing was that they could retrain their brain and get the long-term effect. That's what we're talking about, brain fitness. Just like working out your muscles, we need to keep doing that. And so they're going to continue to follow those athletes who are in the younger age groups. The seniors left and went on to whatever, but if they were a freshman who had a concussion, they're going to follow them for the 4 years. So we're going to continue this study going, like what happens 2 years afterwards, what happens 3 years afterwards. Because I believe that if you don't get to the problem sooner rather than later, the problem becomes part of their nature. It starts thinking, well, this is the way it is now. And it takes a little bit longer. That's the problem with Alzheimer's too, by the way, is once you get to a critical point in the brain's function, then it's harder to bring them back to their youthful brain. But the brain can rebuild itself at any age. I'm convinced of that.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. That's so cool. And I guess this was perhaps a question that would have served better in the beginning of the conversation, but how long has BrainTap been around? When did you get started with it?
This year, before this, I've been doing all these different therapies separately. But in 2014, we designed and built the BrainTap headset, and now we're in version 5. So we have a newer headset, and it has a lot of different features it still looks pretty much the same, but the fit is nicer. We upgraded the speakers, it's just got a better form factor, and people are loving it. I mean, we're doing great out there with people using it. Our average person uses their BrainTap app 28 times a month. So people are getting some good value out of it. And, so we're seeing some great changes out there.
It's so cool. Yeah. And I guess the primary reason why I asked was you started in 2014 with the technology that's been 6 years now?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, 8 years. And can't do quick math. So 8 years. But what's so neat is you're now seeing people that, let's say they use it on a regular basis. You can look at their improvements a year later, 3 years later, 5 years later, and learn new things from that data, and then further develop it and expand it and come up with new methods and new technologies. And it's just really neat. So awesome. I have one last question for you, and then we can wrap up. But before we get to that, where can people learn more about you and connect with you and learn more about BrainTap?
Well, I think in the show notes, I'm going to get you a link that you can give them, and they can get a free copy of my book, Thrive in Overdrive. And they can also get 15 days free on the app so they can try it for themselves. Of course, they don't have the headset, but that'll give them a good idea of what to experience. We did get we did a sleep study with Australia coal miners, and we found that the app alone just took a little bit longer to get the same result. Like it took 3 weeks to get the result of a 70% improvement in sleep scores in 3 weeks. In the group that used just the app alone, it took them 6 weeks to get to that point. They were such bad sleepers. These were people that had no circadian rhythm. They worked in the dark. They basically never saw the light of day. They were 12 hours a day in a mind. So, we could show them that by using BrainTap, we could get their body back balanced.
Very cool. Yeah, so I'll have that linked up in our show notes for people to access that. And I want to wrap up our conversation basically encompassing everything that we've talked about in terms of health and why we do this, why we have conversations like this, why you do your work at BrainTap. But what does it mean to you when I ask, what does it mean to live a good life?
Well, I think first of all that we become somebody who's an example to other people.
Mm,
Are we living more than from our own self, but we're looking at the community of people that we live with, and are we adding value? Are you
mm,
plussing the experience? Are you one of those people that takes away from the experience? I think the good life is, you're adding to people's experience and giving value.
mm. I love that. It's so needed in today's world where unfortunately it seems to be egocentric and self-centered. And you turn on social media or the news and it's, a lot of people it's about themselves. And if we can get into that framework and mindset of giving back to others and making it more community based
Mhm.
and benevolent and helping each other, that's where we really thrive
Yep.
as not just individuals, but as a society. So appreciate you.
Yep. Appreciate you having me. Thanks for helping spread the
Yeah,
word.
it's been absolutely great conversation. I appreciate you coming back on, and I look forward to growing together and learning more and discovering more in the future.
Okay. Thank you, Dan.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Porter. Have a good one.